Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of HealthTech with Purpose podcast. Today's guest is Kal Patel, founder and CEO of BrightInsight. With a background in medicine and consulting, Karl offers valuable insights into merging worlds of healthcare and technology. We'll explore his journey, lessons learned, and the profound impact of AI on shaping the future of patient care. Join us for this insightful discussion. Hi Karl, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Yes, very good, and really looking forward to this conversation. We have been following Bright Insights in some time, and you guys have been really making waves, so that's fantastic. And to this today's podcast, we would like to learn more about your journey and some of the lessons that you can share while building Bright Insight.
Thanks for having me, Ayush. Looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah. So why not we get started right away? So, Carl, why not you talk a bit about more of your introduction from the sense of, your beginnings and, like what led you to starting Bright Insight and whatever you have built today, what were some of those lessons that were your experiences as you were growing up or any particular things that happened in your life that made a major impact on you. If you can shed some light on those aspects, that would be
Yeah.
fantastic to start with.
Yeah, sure. A lot to unpack there and a lot of time between, your comment about early days and Bright Insight. So maybe I'll just briefly touch on some of those because I think they all fed into, ultimately what we're doing here at Bright Insight. So, I'm a physician by education, physician MBA by education. Actually, though spent about 7 years working in management consulting at Boston Consulting Group, working across all of healthcare, pharma, payers, providers, medical device, et cetera. And that experience really opened my eyes to a lot of the challenges that are not just within industry, but really sit across industry, across the healthcare industry. And key part of the learning there for me was around how do you drive impact at scale? A lot of things that were being worked on were really solving important, but incremental or point solutions, whether clinical or process or technology. But very few things were really driving impact at scale. So that was one of the things that really stayed with me from those early experiences. And the second part was really around how do you align incentives? Because a lot of the challenges I saw were that even though something made sense in theory, the way the incentive systems were set up, there were key stakeholders that were not incentivized to really drive that adoption and deliver impact at scale, whether that was the provider, the payer, maybe the patient, but there was, often a lack of aligned incentives. But so anyways, I had a lot of that early experience, and then I actually moved into directly into the pharma industry. So I had different roles in the commercial organization at Novartis Pharma and their U.S. pharma business, and then at Amgen, where I did three different roles: was head of corporate strategy, the global marketing lead for one of their main assets, Enbrel. And then I founded and led what we called Amgen Digital Health. And at Amgen, we were one of the early pharmacos that really focused in a deep way on data and technology, and digital technology rather. And for us, the question that we framed was, we're spending billions of dollars in R&D, bringing these amazing therapies to market. Yet, in the real world, like all drugs, they don't reach their full potential in terms of the reaching all the patients that they could help, and then effectively getting utilized by those patients to drive the full clinical impact and for them. And so the way we set up Amgen Digital Health was, how do we leverage digital technologies to improve the real world performance of our drug therapies? And so we built solutions that wrapped around our drugs and helped solve, depending on the disease and the drug, one or multiple problems around either getting those patients identified, helping those patients get on therapy, and then helping those patients appropriately use the drug so that they stay on therapy and are likely to achieve, the clinical outcomes that we saw in the clinical trials. So that, really opened up my co-founder's world in a big way on both the opportunity, which was massive, but also the challenges to deliver against that opportunity. And that led ultimately to the creation of Bright Insight, because what we saw was that building those solutions was not about just doing point solutions and kind of fixing problem one, fixing problem two, fixing problem three, but to really do that, again, coming back to my point around scale, is you needed to have compliant infrastructure that was globally available on top of which you can build these solutions. So you can't just run to AWS or Google Cloud or Azure and start building these things. That if you would get much more robust, faster, compliant solutions if you had the right infrastructure. And that's what we do at BrightInsight, is provide that infrastructure for pharma and medical device companies to build regulated software solutions at global scale.
And you mentioned you were a physician and then you went into consulting and then you became an entrepreneur. So, was that something you had in mind, like when you were, say, you were a medical student? So,
Yeah.
did you aspire to be a founder or running a business, or
Uh,
you,
hundred
what were
percent
your
no.
aspirations growing up?
100% no. I think even if you asked me a year or two before I moved to entrepreneurship, I went to a telemedicine company called Doctor in Demand as chief commercial officer in between Amgen and starting BrightInsight. I would have said 100% no, I'm not an entrepreneur. To be honest, like all of those steps, I'm not one to say, let me think about, how am I going to plot out the next 10 or 20 or 30 years of my career. To me, it's been around, where do I see the big opportunity? Where am I passionate? Where do I believe I can drive bring something to bear that's going to drive differentiated impact? And that's what's driven me, right? So when I went to medical school, it wasn't to go to medical school to then eventually go to pharma as an example, or become an entrepreneur. That's what I was passionate about, and that's what I wanted to learn, and that's where I saw, the ability for myself to both get experience, but also drive impact. And I think in some ways, key part of my journey has been that, which is not to over plan, and to be overly prescriptive, because I think then you
Remain
box yourself.
agile.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you box yourself in. When I was in
Right.
medical school, there was no such thing, quote unquote, as digital health. I don't think anybody had used those two words together.
Right, right. And probably we'll touch upon AI at some point in today's discussion, if time and opportunity permits. But
Yep.
yeah, just like how the world is changing.
Yep.
So, one thing that I would like you to go a bit deeper, because that was definitely, I think, a very different thing that you mentioned and very useful, is impact at scale. I think you mentioned in your journey, you got lucky joining one of the big consulting companies and you were able to see impact at scale. So, related to a founder's journey or a startup journey, can you talk more about what it really means, and how to really make yourself abreast with this concept called impact at scale?
Yeah. And I think in healthcare, it's particularly an interesting space to talk about impact at scale, because ultimately, health is a very personal and individual thing, right? At the end of the day, our journeys and what we experience is uniquely, to each of us. And I think healthcare in that sense is very personally delivered, right? And I think being a physician is a great example of that, right? You're seeing, in most cases, one patient at a time, right? You're not seeing 10 patients at a time or 100 patients at a time. You're seeing folks one-on-one. So the question becomes is, how do you, in a world where care is ultimately delivered in a very personal one-on-one way, can you drive impact at scale, right? And I think if you think about that, then you say, okay, well, what are the things that you can unlock that enable you to do that, right? And I think when you ask yourself that question, you say, okay, well, what's the kind of problems and what's the kind of innovation that can really behind the scenes create that kind of impact at scale, but then at the end of the day, for an individual user, it feels very individualized and personalized. I think that's kind of the framing. And so if you take that broader lens and you say, okay, so what can be done? So let's just take, let's say a disease area where, I'll use the example of one of my kids. My oldest daughter has seasonal allergies. She, needs, some kind of medicines to help her manage those allergies, so that her sniffling and her eyes watering and, all that good stuff is better managed. So, today you go to the doctor, you describe your symptoms, maybe they run some diagnostics tests, they write a prescription, and the typical experience is, you go home and you hopefully that medicine works. You go back in 6 months and they ask you, how's it going? And maybe they make some adjustments. That's personal, but it's not very data driven because you're getting that little bit of point in time of what she's experiencing or what she's remembering or what I'm remembering that we're telling them in the doctor's office. The big miss is, well, how is she actually doing between those two visits, right? And that's where, for example, technology solution come in that can be capturing, for example, either through a smart device, her utilization of the device, and or is just prompting and asking her what her symptoms are, and even capturing just a few data points at choice moments between those two visits would dramatically bring the right insight to that physician so that when we go back in for our next checkup, they can make a more personalized, better decision on keep you on therapy, change it, add to it, try something different, whatever it might be, right? So that is just a small example of impact at scale, which is you can build that solution. It can be deployed to every single patient, frankly, in the world who has a smartphone and has seasonal allergies. And you start enabling them to collect that, and you're going to drive impact at scale across any of those users, because for sure it's going to lead to a more effective conversation when they end up with their doctor, right? And then I'll mention one more thing. You talked about AI. That just becomes a natural place of where AI can come in, right? Because AI can help you think through, okay, what are the right times to prompt and get the information? What's the right way to get a 12-year-old to respond versus maybe a 48-year-old to respond to get the data, right? How you engage them and prompt them to get that information, what medium you might use might be very different, right? And AI is probably going to be very good at personalizing, customizing my habits versus her habits on how to prompt us to get the information it needs. AI can be very good at helping synthesize that information. So when you walk into the doctor's office, you're not just giving them all this data and then they have to decipher it. AI can be very good at taking it and giving a preliminary, summary of the information to the doctor, so it makes it much more faster for them to analyze it. It could potentially even give the doctor a recommended diagnosis or assessment, right, and get much more to a clinical assessment, and the doctor can then validate it, right? So there's lots of places where now you kind of take the example I gave, where AI can come in and start those are just small examples. I think you do a lot more than that, but
Right.
that can sit on top of that. So that's really the opportunity with impact at scale. It's not about fundamentally turning us all into a generic patient or a generic customer. It's actually using the power of technology to hyper personalize and improve the care we get, the support we get, but with very scalable approaches to enable that.
Right. Right. No, well said. Yeah, I mean, I get the context. Like, while it's personalized, it's it is at scale. So
Yeah.
yeah. Cool. So, Carl, another thing that I was very intrigued in knowing from you today was to talk about that pharma is one of the tough areas to get into, especially as a startup, because pharma industry as a whole is very skeptic about making any new bets unless they've seen already things happening by others, which is a catch 22 for any startup.
Mhm.
So, like, tell us more about your journey, how you cracked your first customers or your alpha customer,
Yeah.
like when you started back then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so first, you're right. Pharma is a very skeptical and conservative buyer, and there's good reason for that. Number one, as a business, they have assets that are typically multi-billion-dollar assets, right? So we're not talking about that they have a typical pharma company doesn't have 1,000 products. They have a handful of products, and each one of those is fundamental to the existence and value of that company. So they have these very, very valuable assets. These assets they've spent billions of dollars bringing to market, right? So they're going to naturally be very careful about anything that touches their drugs. Secondly, these
Right.
are obviously medicines that are going into patients, so there's a huge element around safety that naturally
Right.
should be there, and hence, pharma brings the right level of thoughtful and kind of conservatism around how, the safety aspect of it all. So, and then thirdly, when you move into digital now, pharma is moving to space, frankly, where historically they've been very uncomfortable, which is collecting data about their end user in a specific, in a patient specific way. In fact, sometimes I laugh. You talk about social media companies, pharmas are like the opposite. They try. I don't know any industry that tries harder to have less data about their end customer. Because of this, historical, conservatism
Has
and
it changed like over the
it's
years? Has it?
slowly changing. It's slowly changing. And you see this, for example, pharma's hiring now people into marketing roles that are coming from the consumer industry at a level that I've never seen before, right? And they're talking at least around having understanding of their customers, not just at the level of kind of generic patient journeys, but really understanding, at the level of individuals, what their journey is and doing that segmentation and trying to support that. So they're slowly moving in the right direction. Because there's a lot of value to unlock for their patients and for their businesses. So, but coming back to your question, right? So they are very conservative, and they don't typically want to be the first person to do something. They want to be fast followers on proven innovation, and so I think to get in the door, it can be a challenge. I think, the things that really helped us at Bright Insight, number one, all of us as co-founders, we came from the industry. We had all worked at, multiple pharma companies or other medical device companies, et cetera, right? We had, very established, backgrounds individually as well.
This episode of Health Tech with Purpose podcast is brought to you by MindBowser, a product engineering and digital transformation company focused on health. At MindBowser, we enable health companies to build the future of health where accessible, equitable, and patient care.
We strongly believe that technology can empower a healthier world, and that's why we are partnering with healthcare experts like yours to make it happen.
Hi guys, thanks for listening to Health Tech with Purpose. Make sure to subscribe us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube for more expert insights on industry innovation and transformation. And remember, share the knowledge.
You mentioned the medical degree, but other engineering and other appropriate, healthcare focused backgrounds. One of my co-founders had done software as medical device algorithms in his career, et cetera. So I think that goes a long ways. Are you just nothing wrong with it, but if you're a group of innovators without that deep healthcare background, they're going to be more skeptical than if you come and have walked in their shoes, right? So that's one. Secondly, we came to them with our first customers where we were part of a bigger company that they were also familiar with, right? And so that went a long way for us to be part of Flex or Flextronics and to say, hey, look, we already serve your industry. And so that gives that other, additional validation, right? So I think those are the types of things that are important. But a few others I'll add. At the end of the day, like again, saying, "Hey, I've literally worked in the same job in maybe even the same company that you're at today." To
Talking
be
their
able
language.
talking their language is key. To be able to start by actually not talking about the technology, but being able to intimately talk about the problem and also talk about the challenges. So for us, we would start by saying, "Hey, to do this but forget about the innovation. You got to first talk about regulatory. You got to talk about data privacy. You got to talk about data security. You got to talk about quality management systems, right? Like, because then they're like, oh, okay, now I get this, right? That they're starting by understanding all of the concerns I'm going to have. And then you can migrate to, okay, well, how does our technology, robustly, cover all of those requirements and risks before we talk about how it could actually drive that impact, right? So it's spot on that you got to be able to talk their language. And then, in the early days, you got to find the sponsors, right? So you got to find those people who on the other side want to be able to, are there, not just about want to take risk, but they are willing to champion, right? They're willing to, fight the internal battles to do something when it's easy for people to say no, right? And that's going to take a client that really has a similar level of passion that you do as the entrepreneur and who's going to really partner with you and stick with you. You can form that partnership to navigate all of those challenges together. Because if you don't have that, it's going to fail at some point. You might make the sale, but at some point, the project's going to turn.
Yeah, no surprises. I mean, yeah, very much in line. But something I could take away is definitely like talking the customer's language and not putting a solution upfront, but really working with them towards recognizing the problem and then working with them to find the solution. So
Yeah.
it's a co
Yeah,
innovation.
I'll give you another example. So when I was at Amgen, running the digital health group, I would have all these entrepreneurs and startups come to us, right? And it was so easy within the first minute, those that really understood our problem and our industry and those who didn't, right? And, exactly at that point. And the reality is like for those who didn't, their technology could be fantastic, but you're just not going to work with them because it's, you're never going to get there. It's just going to be too hard. They need to come in having done that work, right? And so even for us, like even though we're a brand agnostic, therapy agnostic solution today for pharma, we don't walk in without understanding, hey, what's the disease area you're working in? Even though our technology is agnostic to the disease area, we need to understand and say, hey, okay, in rheumatoid arthritis, we understand the disease, we understand the patient journey, we understand, the specific challenges that, et cetera, right? And then we can talk about, hey, how does our technology help within there, right? Versus if we even just skip from regulatory compliance to a generic discussion of our solution, the person who's running the RA brand is going to want to know that you understand RA, right? So you have to, invest to really, know the customer's shoes before you can talk about the solution.
So cool. Yeah, no, makes sense so much. And thanks for sharing, that context. So Carl, let's talk about some of the current affairs at Bright Insight. So two things that, really stood out in my research. One was that you are you went through this exercise of rebranding and, creating a new digital identity for the company. So, as a leader, what was your reasoning for taking that initiative within the company, and what were your learnings, if you can share?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, the reasoning was quite straightforward. We've been around for about with that branding for about 5 years. So we wanted to make sure that as the technology world is evolving quickly, as the digital healthcare world is evolving quickly, that our branding continues to reflect how we want to be positioned in the market, right? Which is as leaders, as being modern, as being solid and trustworthy, et cetera. So it was just really ensuring that our branding stayed at the forefront and stayed leading against the types of differentiators we see in ourselves. So that was part of the logic, and I think it's also becomes just good conduit to help folks not get used to something, right? So you want to have that balance of, oh, we know Bright Insight, we know that they're well known for A, B, and C, but here's a nice slightly differentiated, updated look for them that just gives a little bit of a refresh energy.
Yeah, and maybe hit a stimuli when next time they see Bright Insight again.
Exactly. Yeah, they'll notice something different, right? It's instead of being like, oh, I've seen, just like, any brand that, I mean, take an iconic brand, not to compare us to something like a Coca-Cola, but why does Coke still, go through their, right? Because everybody knows and trusts that brand, but it still gives everybody that slight little pause to be like, oh, yeah, here's a slightly different look. And, it feels, consistent
Yeah,
with
not
that.
dead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Cool. And the second thing, I wanted to talk about, that I think you've done very well, because one of the cues being that you were recently awarded, recognized by the Forbes 2024 survey as one of the best places to work for startup employers, as a startup employers. So talk to us about that, and primarily, like, what are some of the cultural hacks that as a leader you have inculcated or you have been part of,
Yeah.
within that?
Yeah, no, look, we were really proud with the Forbes recognition because it's totally third party driven. They don't ask us anything. They look at the data that they can assess and come up with that. So I think it's very objective. So certainly we were, proud of the team and proud of the whole company for that recognition. In terms of the cultural hacks, I would say I don't know if the word hack is appropriate in this setting. And I only say that because I don't think culture is about shortcuts. I think it's actually about what we're doing all the time, and whether it's, how
Or maybe
we're,
cultural decisions, maybe we
yeah,
call it
no,
cultural
yeah,
decisions,
yeah, yeah. I
because you
think
always have to make a choice. There are always
exactly,
choices.
exactly, right. And I think those choices come through all the time. It comes through in one-on-ones with somebody, regardless of who that person is and what level, et cetera. It comes in how we interact with, customers and prospects and what we stand for and how we express our values. Um, and it certainly comes through in all the tough business, decisions and discussions and stuff. So one is just having that common view of, what is it that we stand for. So, right. Examples of that would be, we really believe that in order for us to do our best work, we have to really be taking care of ourselves, right? And so we do things like have mental health Fridays, where once a month, the company's off on Fridays. And, for some people, I've used that to go up to wine country with my wife and have a nice, relaxing day. Sometimes I've used it to catch up on emails and other like bigger problems that I wanted to think about that I just didn't get a chance to because the work weeks have been too hectic, right? So, but the point is, it's time for me to decide what I need to do for myself, and it could be, whatever that is, right? So, but that's something that has been with us since the beginning of COVID, just as a small example, right? Another example I would give is, we're very, if somebody has something that they need time off for. I've never seen anybody in this company say, "Oh, you can't go, take time off to do something for yourself, something for, a loved one. You need to fly across the world to take care of a relative, in another country." We always say, "You go do that. We will figure it out." Right. And it's never about like, "Hey, you can't do that," or "You have to keep working while you're taking care of something else." We all immediately default to how do we, support each other and what's happening, in our personal lives that needs attention. And, we'll figure out the work. Right. And I think that gives, the ability for folks to not have to artificially compartmentalize that, their work life, if you will, from everything else that's going on at home, right? And I have 3 kids, so I have constant examples of that. I'll be like, "Hey, sorry, I can't be on video on this one. My daughter missed the bus. I'm driving her to school," which is what happened this morning. I had a call with somebody. I said, "Hey, sorry, I got one of my kids in the car. I'm dropping it off instead of being, on Zoom with you," right? And that's just how we operate. There's no feeling bad about that. There's no judging anybody else about that. So, so it's those types of things. But then there's, also very important, oriented things around why we're here, right? So that we're constantly focused on what is the impact we're trying to drive, right? Coming back to your question on impact at scale, right? So I always say everybody at BrightInsight could get 5 other jobs quickly, right? But they're here because they really believe in, our mission, they believe in our vision, and we're extremely committed to that. And so we have a real desire for problem solving in a pragmatic way to help get to that outcome, right? And so it's not about bureaucracy, and it's not about, it's my job or it's your job. It's like, what we as a team be doing to move faster, better, more robustly to, driving impact at scale for patients through digital. And so I think that orientation really aligns everybody in a very motivating and healthy way, and kind of helps cut through a lot of the, let's just call it, inefficiencies or bureaucracies that otherwise kind of naturally happen and as the company grows.
No, I can understand, totally relate running my own company. Like these small things basically add up, and sometimes you would like just initiate a small thing, but it could have like it would go a long way
Yeah.
for people to find a reason to like your place or come to work for the company that you are building or the
Yeah.
vision that you are building.
Yeah. And to be clear, we are far, far from perfect. I'm far, far from perfect as a leader, and everybody in the company, we're far from perfect, right? So it's a journey. We're constantly learning. We're making mistakes. We're, trying to get better at it. But I think we have an orientation towards, we're in it for the right reasons, and we give each other that support, team first, and then we try to learn and get better.
Yeah, I mean that's the way it is. Yeah,
Mhm.
continuous
Yeah.
improvement. Uh, so the another last thing that I'd like to cover today is the big elephant in the room, the AI, and especially I'd like to ask you from the context of where you are today, like building digital transformation for the bioscience companies, pharma, and so on. And
Yeah.
because these companies have typically been known to be the laggards to be able to take up new technology and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, if you can take some time to elaborate, being an insider man,
Yeah.
like being, I would say, rather a person who can speak from
Yeah.
that industry behalf,
Yeah.
like where and
Yeah.
how AI is impacting, what are the opportunities, what do you see, both problems, solutions? Yeah.
Yeah. So our main product that pharma uses is something called the disease management solution. So it's basically a highly configurable, key part of it is a highly configurable patient app, right? And so regardless of the disease area, we're in everything from autoimmune diseases to, ophthalmological diseases to, oncology, rare disease, et cetera. So we have this fundamental technology that's this disease management solution. But when you go across what are the types of things that we're doing, really AI can enhance virtually every aspect of it, from thinking about screening to diagnosis to therapy selection, which often is more of the top of the funnel, if you will. But then you think about treatment onboarding, actually helping the patient manage that specific disease for them personally, helping them stay persistent or adherent to the therapy, analyzing the data and thinking about the outcomes. All of this type of stuff is AI. It's a huge opportunity for AI to have impact. But to your point around, again, in a conservative industry, how do you bring in this kind of technology? That's a great question. So what we are focused on with our DMS and with our customers is, what are the things that we can do that are ultimately of lowest risk from a clinical or safety perspective? So it's things like, can we use AI in order to make it easier to onboard a patient onto therapy? So for example, even just filling out the forms that you might be filling out or providing your background information. Can we use it to personalize the interventions in terms of keeping you adherent to your therapy, right? So again, that might be AI saying, hey, Ayush is going to get a text message with this, kind of reminder, and Cal's going to get an email with this in it or whatever, right? So like, how do we, generate versus having just, a regimented, intervention protocol? Another example is, how do we take the data that we're collecting? Like I was giving the example with my daughter and her symptoms. How do we collect that kind of data and then use AI to summarize that? So again, not make a clinical recommendation, but how do we use it to summarize it so that then can be used to have a more efficient, effective conversation between the healthcare provider and the patient. So these are the types of areas where we're pushing with our DMS solution, which are, again, areas that can have a big impact for experience or ultimately enable, a better conversation and clinical outcome without moving into AI practicing medicine. I think we're still a ways away from having, both the technology ready for prime time and certainly, our customer base ready to, jump into that. But we'll get there eventually, but it'll be a journey.
Right, right. So we can definitely see the technology, has that promise that the things can be done. But today the CIO of let's say any large pharma company, are they looking at AI already as what they want to invest in, or are they skeptics still that let it
Yeah.
prove itself first? So what has been the attitude that
Yeah.
you
Yeah, no, I'll tell you that AI is definitely a huge area of investment. I would say virtually across every company that we're working with, or even ones that we're talking to and not yet working with, right? I'll give you an example. Sanofi is a public customer of ours. They're Chief Digital Officer, Emmanuel has talked a lot about AI. Even their CEO, Paul Hudson, has published about the company being all in on AI. And so they have a very extensive portfolio of areas where they're applying that technology. You look at another company like Amgen, they recently took their head of R&D and made them the CTO of the company. I think a really, really interesting move to take David Reese, who's, an amazing person, amazing R&D leader, and now having him focus on how to leverage technology to improve not just R&D, but, drive impact at scale across the company. And a huge part of what David's already been doing, right, has been around leveraging AI. And I think they might have even publicly announced some things with NVIDIA and others. So yeah, it's for sure where the industry is embracing, which is great. But similar to the point I made earlier, they're thinking about what are those use cases that are less directly going to put themselves in the, from a risk perspective, if you will. Excuse me. And then secondly, what we're encouraging them to think through is what are the capabilities you need to build internally versus what are the capabilities you need to find a best-in-class partner, right? So, again, what Emmanuel at Sanofi would tell you is, why would I rebuild what BrightInsight does? I have so many other problems to tackle that are going to drive value that they don't have, or a partner doesn't have the right capability, or the capability really needs to sit internally. So I think that's the part that becomes important now is, there's going to be no shortage of areas that AI can drive an impact. The question is, how do you, again, build that capability internally, and where versus where do you partner that capability with the best in class partner who can work with your organization to unlock that problem and value.
Yeah, I mean, that's where a company like BrightInsight, would come in as, doing the heavy lifting, to build those solutions.
Yeah,
How
exactly. Yeah, and remember, again, we're fundamentally come from a compliance-driven perspective, right? Which is very, very important in general, but particularly from an AI perspective, right? It's not that we're building and deploying, these solutions outside of the context of the quality management system and the regulated, space that, we enable our customers to operate in.
Yeah, that's common for all pharma and health.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand. Cool. Thank you so much, Karl. It has been a really pleasure, spending the last 45 minutes with you on this podcast. Some really great insights that I was able to learn, and I equally feel for all our audience who would tune in for this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks
And
for having me,
we
Ayush.
wish you all the best on your journey. And
Thanks. Same to you, and appreciate you reaching out and enjoy the conversation as well.
Thank you.
All right, cheers.
Thank you for joining us on the Health Tech with Purpose podcast. Before you leave, make sure to like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And if you would like to see someone on this podcast, do refer to us. My contact details are in the description. Before I leave, I wish you stay healthy, stay curious, and keep building.